Alright everybody, how we doing today? That's glare from the window. I should probably put the curtain down or something. Anyway. Propaganda 101. The New York Times pumps another evil Russia plot. Yeah, the New York Times isn't journalism, it's activism. It's activist propaganda. Just look up the 1619 Project and you'll know it immediately. You should take a look at my coverage at that. That is an underappreciated video of mine. It doesn't get nearly enough attention. The newspaper of record, New York Times, arguably holds the record for peddling anti-Russia scare stories. Hold on a second. Anyway, anti-Russia scare stories. This week, the NYT Times delivered yet another classic spook tale dressed as serious news. Among its splash articles under the headline, Top Secret Russian Unit Seeks to Destabilize Europe, security officials say readers were told of an elite Russian spy team which has allegedly only recently been discovered. It's called Unit 29155 and reportedly directed by the Kremlin to destabilize Europe with subversion, sabotage, and assassination. According to the NYT Times, this crack squad of Russia's most ruthless military intelligence agents were involved in an attempted assassination of an arms dealer in Bulgaria. In 2015, the destabilization of Moldova, a failed coup against the Montenegrin government, and the alleged poisoning of former double agent, Sergei Skripal in England last year. The article states Western security officials have now included that these operations and potentially many others are part of a coordinated ongoing campaign to destabilize Europe executed by an elite unit inside the Russian intelligence system skilled in subversion, sabotage, and assassination. The NYT Times added the purpose of Unit 29155, which has not been previously reported, underscores the degree to which the Russian President Vladimir V. Putin is actively fighting the West with his brand of so-called hybrid warfare, a blend of propaganda, hacking attacks, and disinformation, as well as open military confrontation. This is all because the readers are told the Kremlin sees Russia as being at war with a Western liberal order that it views as an existential threat. You want to talk about fear-mongering, this is what it looks like. This is real fear-mongering. This is not a legitimate fear. We're talking about a unit of spies that allegedly exists, but no physical evidence has ever been shown by the NYT. This is basically just a conspiracy theory. In response, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed it as more of the pulp fiction category which Western news media have manufactured, with seeming increasingly intensity over recent years. Peskov pointed out that Moscow has repeatedly stated its desire to normalize relations with Western states and the European Union in particular, contradicting the theme of the NYT Times piece. Indeed, the Russian embassy in Britain recently published a compilation of false articles peddled by Western media over the past 4 years. The NYT Times features prominently as one of the main purveyors of scare stories about alleged to malign Russian activities, from hacking into presidential elections to targeting American power grids, to covert collusion with President Donald Trump. For students of Propaganda 101, this week's tale makes a case study of how disinformation and dissemination in the guise of news reporting. First of all, the NYT Times reporter Michael Schwartz gives a meandering account of lurid, dirty deeds performed in various international locations, allegedly carried out by the supposed elite Kremlin hybrid warriors. But tellingly, there are no details that evidence Russian involvement. It's all lurid speculation, spiced with fear-mongering, which reads like a pallid John Le Carre spy novel. Then the usual giveaway that the NYT Times is engaging in disinformation. It quotes anonymous security officials for apparent verification of its claims about Unit 29155. This is tacit admission of who the real authors are, Western spooks. Next, a neat effort to give the lame story some legs is to quote named public figures, but these sources don't confirm the existence of the alleged Kremlin unit. They are merely invited to speculate on its existence and presumed malign purpose. One of those named sources is MI6 Chief Alex Younger. Yes, that's right. The paper of record is quoting British military intelligence as a reliable source of public information. Author named source is Peter Zwak, who is described as a former U.S. military intelligence officer who worked at the American Embassy in Moscow. Zwak is quoted as describing Russians as organically ruthless, whatever that means. while the paper actually admits that he was not aware of the unit's existence. The purpose of throwing a few names into the reporting mix is to lend a veneer of credibility to the nebulous, unverifiable, scary stuff that the anonymous spooks feed the reporter. Yeah, go figure. The NYT is a huge joke. This is right up their alley. This is typical. A special mention must be given to a third-name source quoted by the NY Times. He is Eric Niles Cross, an Estonian lawmaker and former military intelligence chief in Tallinn. He styles himself as Estonia's James Bond, and is known for his salacious, Russia-phobic warnings of imminent invasion of the Baltic states. Over the past 3 decades, Cross is quoted to speculate on the existence of the alleged Kremlin hybrid warfare unit. Of course, he dutifully serves up his notorious anti-Russian fear-mongering, but he is not confirming his speculation as pseudo-validation of information that is essentially fictional. All in all, the latest installment of anti-Russian propaganda from the NY Times this week is a dumped squib among many previous baseless reports of alleged Kremlin malign activity. If it serves any purpose, it is perhaps a choice illustration of how disinformation is sneakily, insidiously presented as news. The fact that this should appear in a Pulitzer Prize-winning, supposedly premier American newspaper is the disturbing part. But it is no surprise to those who have long studied how the U.S. corporate media has been under the control of state intelligence agencies for many decades, especially after the Second World War and during the subsequent Cold War against the Soviet Union. In a seminal essay in 1977 for Rolling Stone magazine, award-winning journalist Carl Bernstein documented how the CIA systematically cultivated hundreds of reporters, columnists, editors, publishing executives, and broadcast networks to function as conduits for disinformation, much of it directed at demonizing the Soviet Union. From the outset, the use of journalists was among the CIA's most sensitive undertakings, writes Bernstein. He had by far the most valuable of these associations, according to CIA officials, has been with the New York Times, CBS, and Time Inc. How the CIA goes about planting false stories in the American and European media is outlined in the candid interview by John Stockwell, who was former National Security Council coordinator for the agency during the 1970s. Stockwell also added, "Enemies are necessary for the wheels of the U.S. military machine to turn." That is correct. I just mentioned that earlier. It's very much like what the military-industrial complex does. You can't scare and fearmonger people into buying your agenda if you don't have a boogeyman that you can use. No boogeyman, no way to sell the agenda. And it's not just the United States that does it. I've seen the BBC doing it. I've seen the Middle Easterners doing it. Everyone likes to make a boogeyman out of Russia. They're a very popular target for this sort of thing. And admittedly, it doesn't help that Vladimir Putin is a legit scary dude. There's something about the man that just gives you the chills. And the way that LGBT people are treated in Russia is just disgusting. And he does nothing about it. In fact, sometimes he may even be secretly supporting it behind the scenes. Although that's hard to say whether that's actually true or not. But going forward, to finish this one off, you may wonder if the Cold War ended nearly 30 years ago when the Soviet Union dissolved. Why then do the NY Times and other Western media outlets continue to pump out anti-Russian propaganda? But that assumes the Cold War was primarily about the U.S. opposing the ideology of communism. It wasn't. It was and still is all about imposing control over the masses so they don't ever challenge the power structure that deprives them of the full democratic rights and decent livelihoods. Yes, the Cold War never really ended. It's still going on. I've thought that for a long time now. Sure, it's not the classic Cold War where it's capitalism versus communism. It's more like an elongated ghost or zombie of a long-dead conflict. It just doesn't quite want to die. You can shoot it anywhere, but it just comes back up, ready to fight again. In a recent interview, philosopher Andrei Vicek makes the point that Western politicians and media, like the NY Times, keep harping on Cold War scare stories about evil foreigners in order to distract their citizens from thinking about their increasingly limited freedoms and diminishing standards of living. The Cold War continues, and anti-Russia hysteria is but a distraction, as was the anti-Soviet hysteria. The aim is to distract the public from the real Cold War, which is a war by the elites against democracy ever being actually realized among the masses. Yeah, America has turned its back on true democracy a long time ago. We've been heading more and more in an authoritarian direction for a long, long time, and it's just been increasing. That's why we get to see all these lovely violations of the Constitution over and over again, or why people's rights are being violated, or why the government gets away with some of the nasty shit it does. It's because pretty soon, if it keeps true to form, there will be no democracy in the United States after a while. I may live to see it. I don't even want to think about it. This is just classic anti-Russian propaganda. Go figure. It's the same old, same old. It's the back door they use to push authoritarian agendas onto the people and get them to accept it. Well, I ain't buying it, and neither should you. Anyway, peace!